our energy and our money and our leadership in changing the lives of others, ours only get better. Ours genuinely only get better. It may sound selfish, but it's true. If we are not actually legitimately addressing things like climate change, like migration, like health security, like water security, we're going to find over time that each and every one of us is going to feel more and more insecure as the days go on. And that doesn't mean travel to country X and do work there. It doesn't mean you have to go and, quit your job and turn into a traveling nomad that's not what it means. It means there are challenges of trafficking in your own community. It means there's challenges of families that are going bankrupt and homeless because they do not have the money to pay for healthcare in your own community. It means there are kids where right now suicide is the #1 cause of death in youth. There are kids who are having significant mental challenges who cannot get assistance and support in your own community. There are women who have nowhere to go after their husband comes home angry and beats them in your own community. Leadership is looking at what you can do with whatever action, with whatever capacity, with whatever monetary or time you have, and saying, this is what I am going to do in my own community. Because it lacks credibility to not clean up your own backyard and then go tell everybody else how theirs should look. Now, I know I promised a question and answer period, which I will deliver on. You're not allowed to ask any questions, I'm sorry. But if you have any questions, please put up your hand. I will do my best to answer them. If I don't know the answer, I will do my best to direct you to somebody who does, although if I don't know it, that's unlikely. And I hope I can answer all of them. So whoever has a question, please, feel free. I think they have microphones somewhere. Right here in the blue? You know what, I can just come.
So in your story about creating the Voice of Libyan Women, the first step in terms of your strategy was getting that organization, which is some sort of a religious organization, to approve you, or so that you got to use their logo. I don't know if I have it right, but the question is, how did you get them to approve of you and your work?
My incredible charm. So that wasn't the first step. We'd actually been working for about 1.5 years prior to that, predominantly on political and economic empowerment. So literacy training, tech, like ICT training, creating women's centers, helping women run political campaigns, etc. Our first step into delving into a more cultural conversation was sitting down with them. And the idea initially actually was sitting down with them so they didn't think we were the enemy. I did not think we could ever get them to sign that the sayings were authentic. I never thought that was even in the realm of possibility. But what I had learned from having 5 brothers is you need people to know what you're doing and feel like they had some knowledge and not have it surprising them. Because once it surprises them, then you're under their radar and they're out to get you. So this is what happens when you steal your brother's Halloween candy. So I had known that, and our idea was to make them feel like they had been part of the conversation, even if they did not want to take it anywhere. And it was really reaching out and actually leveraging a lot of community relationships. And this is why I say women leaders are crucial. You know, whose son went to school with whose son? Who can get us? We never got to have a meeting in their central building until about 3 months in. It was actually, we were having meetings in people's homes in their living rooms with their families because a friend of the family knew another friend of so-and-so's family. So it was really leveraging people's networks, people's personal networks, not necessarily professional networks. And it took some time. It took about 6 months for them initially to not only say, okay, we're not going to stop this or to throw you guys under the bus, but more so to say, you know what, as long as you're using the sayings of the Prophet and the verse of the Quran in context, you're not taking any out, etc., we can sign saying they're authentic. So it wasn't them giving us permission, we were doing it anyways, but that added stamp of religious authority validation on the content was important for a lot of people. Because prior to that, we had done some projects on religious engagement and people said we were manipulating the text. So it was good, it was crucial to have that. But it really did start from a very personal point of view, and it started really with family relationships and who we could get, who knew who, you know, X person. And I mean, I always tell this story because a lot of people tell me, you know, I'm not going to go down on my values, and I never think you should. But I am the type of person where if you tell me that I need to come to a meeting with a man, I will purposely come alone. And what I learned very quickly, actually, in that regard, was how to be a lot more strategic and look at the long term. I had been told multiple times, listen, if you're coming to a meeting at the main center, you're going to need a male with you. And in the beginning, I was like, we're never going to that meeting. I absolutely refuse. This is ludicrous. And it was actually some of my close friends who said, listen, at the end of the day, you want more women in families that do not have the privilege you have, whose parents are not saying they can go and do the things you can do, to be able to be afforded that privilege. And that means sometimes putting your own pride in the back seat and saying, you know what, this is what we need to do to be able to get there. So that was also a pretty key part for me personally, not necessarily for the organization. Next question.
So I'm just thinking about development, and development is a huge business, frankly, and it involves everything from the multilateral institutions to donors, to donor governments, to the kinds of organizations and the organization that you founded and talked about. And it just strikes me how so much of the real action that needs to happen, and for the action to be impactful, needs to come from the ground, needs to come from organizations like yours who really understand what's happening, understand how to engage the people that are the influencers in any particular situation. But the power actually right now is very much in these global multilateral structures. They do still have a role to play. They play an important role with policies and convening and all of that. How do we flip the power dynamic and kind of recalibrate development, if you will, knowing that there is a role that all of these different entities need to play, but maybe it's not exactly, but the nexus of power needs to be shifted.
Infiltrate. No, I'm serious, actually. It's the reason I agreed to be an SDG advocate and a UN high-level commissioner. I kept going into rooms saying, you guys don't know what you're talking about. And people would say, well, then you need to start getting in the room. And I genuinely believe that. I think more people who have worked on the ground need to be in those organizations and need to have, because they're always going to play a role. The UN, I know a lot of people are like, we're going to get something better. It's not happening anytime soon. I'm surprised it still exists. So, I mean, they're always going to play a role. They're always going to be power brokers. They're always going to be conveners. They're always going to be influential in policy, and we need to be in those rooms. So if you have worked for a local organization and you're like, listen, I want to talk about trafficking in the United States, then go work at the national level. Go be in those rooms and ensure that you've been enough of a leader, that you have created leaders in your local organization who will continue to do the work on the ground, right? Because that's what leadership is. It's being able to cultivate so that other people can do that work without your direction, without your direct existence in that space. So I do think it's important. The second thing I'll say is development is very interesting to me because, and I'm actually going to give an anecdote here, which I hope kind of sums up this story, but we had been in a local community talking about girls' education. And girls' education is one of my greatest passions and one of the things which I think would genuinely transform the world. But so we went into this community and we had noticed the percentage of girls going to schools dropping, and we said, why aren't you sending your girls to schools? We've set up this development plan with these organizations who are going to do some cultural and social literacy for you. And the mom stopped me, literally in the middle of my sentence, and said, I want to show you something. Why don't you come with me? So I went with her for a short walk to the school, and the school was completely demolished. And she said to me, you think I don't want to send my daughter to school? I finished school. But I'm okay as a mother, knowing that my daughter is safe at home, where no one can hurt her. I'm more okay with that than sending her to a school where militias come, where people attempt to take her. I don't need you to teach me social literacy. I need you to create a space where my daughter is safe. And I'll send her to school. And the reason I think that story is so important is because it completely changes who you're working with. It changes which organizations you're going to work with. It changes which partners you're going to need. And so these things where you check a box with different multilaterals that say, oh, you need to educate 2,000 girls, you need to da-da-da, that's unrealistic. We need people working locally who can say, this is what we need and this is how we need it. And we need to have enough humility to realize that it doesn't work the way we always think it does. It's not always in our wheelhouse, that sometimes we get to be taught as well, and that Libya is not like Chad or Senegal, or they're not the same, right? And so I think that's a very important kind of, I respect a lot of the work the development community has done, but I think a lot of it's been done wrong, and that we do need to really transform the way in which we engage in local communities. Any other questions?
I've been reading some stories recently about the emergence of a slave trade in Libya, and I was just curious if you could talk a little bit about your viewpoint on how that's developed and how it can be solved.
For sure. What's been interesting to me is actually when this emerged. This story has been well known in the community, and in particular in the international community, for quite some time. Libya is very nuanced, and I won't attempt I will be oversimplifying, but it's very nuanced. I mean, you have multiple factors which have led to this, right? You have a security vacuum, you have a complete lack of governance, you have a lack of institutional support, you have a history of slavery and racism, and I think most importantly that almost everybody's trying to kind of put under the rug, you have the policies that have been put in place by the EU in order to ensure that no migrants come to their shores. That's very important, because while France and Italy and the EU are feigning outrage